a powerful millionaire widower, a blind little girl, and a nanny who isn't what she seems. At first glance, it looked like a simple story of prejudice at the zoo. But what began as humiliation would explode into a battle that shook the foundations of Chicago's elite schools. This is a story of justice, revenge, and a revolution in education. On a crisp autumn afternoon in Chicago, Thomas Harrison walked hand in hand with his daughter through the sprawling zoo. The cool air carried the scent of leaves and damp earth, and children's laughter echoed from every direction. To the world, Thomas was the polished CEO of a tech empire, a man accustomed to decisive boardroom victories and the weight of responsibility. But today, he was simply a father, cherishing precious hours with Emma, his 8-year-old daughter whose blindness had only sharpened her other senses. She clutched his hand tightly, her world painted not by colors or shapes but by sounds, scents, and emotions she could sense better than most adults. They wandered into the penguin exhibit, Emma smiling as she tilted her head, listening intently, to the squawks and splashes echoing against the concrete walls. Then, suddenly, her grip on Thomas's hand tightened. "Daddy, why is that lady yelling at the girl?" she whispered. Her small voice trembled, carrying a weight far beyond her years. Thomas turned his gaze toward the source of the commotion, and froze. Just a few feet away, a scene was unfolding that made every decent person in the crowd shift uncomfortably. A woman, dressed in fine clothing, her wrists stacked with glittering jewelry, stood tall with the smug air of old money entitlement. Her sharp voice cut across the laughter of children and the cries of penguins. In front of her stood a young, African-American woman, her hand gently holding that of a small blonde girl who looked no older than 5. The nanny's face was calm, her eyes lowered in restraint, but the humiliation she endured was undeniable. "I don't pay a fortune for my granddaughter to be in the same places as people like you," the wealthy woman declared, her words dripping with disdain. "You have your own spaces, don't you think?" Gasps rippled through the crowd, but no one dared confront her. Thomas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. At 35, he knew the cruelty of the world. His wife's sudden death in a tragic accident and Emma's blindness had taught him more about loss and injustice than any corporate battle ever could. Yet, seeing such open prejudice, here of all places and in front of his child, made his heart burn with anger. Emma tugged his sleeve again. "Daddy," she said softly. "She's being mean to the pretty lady. I can hear it in her voice. She's sad." Her words struck Thomas with unexpected force. His daughter, robbed of sight, had developed a remarkable gift, an ability to hear emotion with uncanny accuracy. And now, she could feel the quiet sorrow in the young nanny's voice, even when the woman herself did not shed a tear. The nanny remained composed, her voice calm, though the insult stung. "Ma'am, I'm just taking care of Lily as I always do. We're not bothering anyone." The simple words carried dignity, but the wealthy woman sneered. "Your presence is the bother. People like you never know your place in society." She laughed dismissively, as if the nanny were nothing more than a stain on her world. At that moment, the little girl the nanny held wriggled free and darted toward the penguin enclosure. The crowd gasped as the child stumbled dangerously close to the slick barrier separating her from the pool of animals. "Lily, no!" the nanny shouted, sprinting forward with startling speed. She lunged, catching the child just as her small shoe slipped on the wet ground. The girl landed safely in her arms, but the nanny lost her balance and fell hard onto the soaked concrete, her uniform splattered with dirt and water. Silence blanketed the crowd. Strangers exchanged anxious glances, expecting gratitude from the wealthy grandmother. But instead of relief, the woman's voice cut through again, sharper than ever. "Now, look at you," she scolded. "You can't even take care of a child without causing a spectacle. This is exactly why people like you should never be trusted with our children." Her cruelty left the air heavy, the humiliation weighing visibly on the young nanny. Yet she did not flinch. She rose slowly, still holding the frightened little girl against her chest, her uniform ruined, her dignity tested, but not broken. Thomas watched closely, astonished. For a moment, the nanny's eyes met his. She smiled, not the smile of submission or embarrassment, but something far more mysterious. It was calm, confident, even defiant. It was the smile of someone who carried a secret, someone who knew a truth hidden from everyone else. The expression unsettled Thomas, stirring a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. He sensed this woman was not who she appeared to be, and that this confrontation was only the surface of something deeper. She brushed mud from her sleeve and spoke with deliberate calm. "You're right," she said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "People like me do have a place in society." Her tone wasn't apologetic. It wasn't submissive. It was layered, almost challenging, as though her words held a meaning far greater than what the others understood. Thomas's heart pounded. Around them, the onlookers shifted uneasily, unsure what they had just witnessed. For Thomas, it was more than a passing moment of public cruelty. It felt like the opening move in a much larger story, one that his instincts told him would not end here at the zoo. As Emma leaned against his side, still holding tightly to his hand, Thomas realized that the young nanny's quiet strength had planted a question in his mind, one that would not easily let go. Who was she really? And what place did she truly mean? That evening, the glow of warm light filled the Harrison home, casting long shadows across the dining table. Emma sat opposite her father, carefully cutting her food with the quiet precision she had learned through patience and practice. Thomas tried to appear relaxed, but his mind was still back at the zoo, circling around the young nanny whose mysterious composure had unsettled him. He had faced hostile investors and unpredictable markets, but the memory of her smile tugged at him in a way he could not explain. Emma tilted her head, listening to the small silences between her father's breaths. "Daddy," she said suddenly, "you're thinking about the zoo lady." Thomas froze, his fork pausing midair. "What makes you say that?" he asked lightly, trying to mask his surprise. Emma shrugged, a soft smile on her lips. "Because when you think of her, your heart beats different, and her voice, it was smarter than it sounded. People didn't hear it, but I did." Her words struck Thomas harder than any business negotiation. His daughter's intuition had always been uncanny, but now it felt prophetic. Later that night, long after Emma had gone to bed, Thomas sat in his study with his laptop glowing in the dark. He began typing the name that still echoed in his thoughts: Ashworth. Within moments, a flood of articles filled his screen. The Ashworth family was an institution in Chicago society, their wealth cemented through generations of influence. Their empire revolved around private academies and elite schools, the kind that boasted tradition, prestige, and exclusivity. But as Thomas read deeper, patterns emerged that disturbed him. Lawsuits settled quietly, testimonies from families turned away, whispers of discriminatory admissions cloaked in polished rhetoric about standards and heritage. It was a web of exclusion woven under the guise of excellence. And standing at the top of it all was Victoria Ashworth, the same woman who had humiliated the nanny at the zoo. The puzzle began to take shape, though still missing its center. Days later, the pieces shifted again. Thomas had taken Emma to the city library when he noticed a familiar voice echoing across the marble lobby. He turned a corner and saw Victoria once again, her posture stiff with authority. Before her stood Jasmine, the same nanny, her hands gently resting on little Lily's shoulders. But this time, there were no penguins or spectators, only the sharp crack of Victoria's voice. "I told you before," she snapped. "Your role is to watch Lily, not to fill her head with nonsense. Do not give her inappropriate inspiration. She doesn't need to hear about college or big dreams that don't belong to her world." The words fell heavy, revealing not only cruelty but calculated control. Jasmine's face did not flinch. Instead, she smiled with that same calm assurance that had unsettled Thomas at the zoo. "Children deserve to know they can be more," she said simply, her tone soft yet unyielding. Victoria's lips tightened in irritation. "You'll remember your place, or you'll be replaced," she hissed, dragging Lily away. Thomas remained hidden, his pulse quickening. That smile again. Enigmatic, steady, powerful. Who was this woman? The question would not leave him. The answer came days later in the most unexpected way. It was an ordinary Monday morning at Harrison Tech, the headquarters buzzing with the hum of innovation and ambition. Thomas entered the boardroom expecting to discuss new partnerships with his team. But when the glass doors opened, his breath caught. Standing at the head of the table was Jasmine, not in a nanny's uniform but in a tailored suit, her posture commanding, her presence electric. The room fell silent as she introduced herself with calm authority. "Good morning. My name is Dr. Jasmine Carter, Harvard Ph.D., Special Education Research. I believe we have much to discuss." The shock rippled through the executives, but Thomas was transfixed. She spoke with precision, her words cutting through the air like a surgeon's blade. Then she presented documents, reports, data compiled with painstaking detail, charts exposing how the Ashworth schools had systematically excluded students of color, manipulated admissions criteria, and maintained a network of privilege disguised as tradition. Every page was damning, every statistic undeniable. The woman, who had been scolded as a servant, was, in fact, a scholar dismantling an empire from within. When the meeting adjourned, Thomas remained behind, his thoughts racing. Jasmine approached, her expression calm but eyes burning with resolve. "You're wondering why I was there, playing nanny," she said. "The answer is simple. To expose corruption, you must first walk into its heart. I needed to see it, hear it, and live it to gather proof. Pretending to be their nanny gave me that chance." Thomas studied her, both impressed and unsettled by her audacity. "And now?" he asked. Jasmine placed the folder of evidence on the table between them. "Now, we fight. Your technology can make education more accessible than the Ashworths ever wanted it to be. My research shows where they've built their walls. Together, we can tear them down." For the first time in years, Thomas felt something stir inside him that had nothing to do with profit or prestige. It was purpose. He looked at her, truly looked, and realized that this woman had not only unmasked an empire, she had also offered him a path forward, one that could change countless lives, including Emma's. And as Jasmine's words settled in the air, Thomas knew an alliance had just been born, one that the Ashworths would never see coming. The weeks that followed unfolded like the tightening coils of a trap. By day, Jasmine carried herself with the composed grace of an academic, speaking at universities and consulting with Thomas about the technology his company could repurpose to track educational accessibility. By night, however, she returned to a role few would have expected, slipping quietly into the Ashworth mansion with the careful stealth of someone who knew that every step mattered. With a small black case of hidden devices, she began to plant recorders in places where careless words were most often spoken, underneath the polished mahogany table of the dining room, behind the gilded mirror in the study, even near the playroom, where staff whispered secrets they were too afraid to say aloud. Each click of the recorder felt like laying a stone in the foundation of justice. And slowly, the voices collected. Victoria, mocking a scholarship applicant as charity that doesn't belong, board members agreeing to raise fees to keep the wrong families away, and staff revealing how admissions tests were quietly altered to favor wealthy legacies. It was damning, ugly, and undeniable. Meanwhile, Thomas embraced his own dangerous role. It was Jasmine's idea to test Victoria directly, and though it unsettled him, he knew it had to be done. He scheduled a private meeting under the pretense of enrolling Emma into Ashworth Academy. He arrived at the mansion one brisk morning, dressed in his tailored suit, carrying himself with the casual confidence of a tech magnate. Victoria received him with her usual thin smile, her diamonds flashing under the chandelier. "Mr. Harrison," she purred, "it's an honor to host you. We value families of your caliber." The word lingered, sharp with unspoken meaning. As they toured the marble hallways lined with oil portraits of Ashworth ancestors, Thomas deliberately mentioned Emma's blindness. The shift in Victoria's expression was instantaneous. Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowed with subtle distaste. "Such challenges," she murmured, carefully choosing her words, "require environments more specialized than what we offer. You understand, of course, our traditions are not suited for exceptions." Her dismissal was cloaked in politeness, but the venom underneath was unmistakable. Thomas, his watch discreetly recording every word, forced himself to smile back. "I understand perfectly," he said, though inside he felt his daughter's worth being measured and discarded like a defective object. When he left, the bile of anger rose in his throat, but so did determination. Victoria had handed them the very evidence they needed. Soon after, their quiet rebellion gained an ally. Dr. Marcus Williams arrived in Chicago, his presence as commanding as his reputation. A towering man with sharp intellect and years of courtroom battles carved into his voice, Marcus was Jasmine's classmate from Harvard and now one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the country. Over dinner at Thomas's home, Marcus listened intently as Jasmine replayed the audio recordings and Thomas revealed Victoria's rejection. He leaned back, folding his hands thoughtfully. "This isn't just prejudice," he said firmly. "It's systemic exclusion, orchestrated, from the top down. With this evidence, we can dismantle not only their practices but their credibility." Emma, seated quietly at the table, turned toward his voice and smiled. "You sound like someone who wins," she said innocently. Marcus chuckled, glancing at Jasmine. "From the mouths of children comes truth." His confidence steadied the group, and for the first time, Thomas felt the possibility of victory draw near. The operation began to grow. Parents frustrated with the Ashworth system volunteered to go undercover, applying for enrollment while secretly recording their experiences. Reporters from investigative outlets agreed to wait in the shadows, ready to release the story once. The legal case had been secured. Investigators quietly traced the Ashworth finances, uncovering a network of donors and hidden trusts designed to protect the family's empire. It was a delicate dance of patience and precision. Each night, Jasmine coordinated the moving pieces from Thomas's office, her calm voice guiding allies like a conductor leading an orchestra. Tension hung heavy in the air, but so did purpose. And yet, inside the Ashworth mansion, Victoria Ashworth remained blind in her arrogance. To her, the world was still under her control. She attended galas draped in couture, sipping champagne while boasting of her family's legacy. She dismissed whispers of scrutiny as jealousy, convinced that her wealth and reputation were shields impenetrable to common attack. Even when rumors of an investigation reached her ears, she laughed them off. "Let them try," she sneered to her circle of friends. "We built this city's standards. No one dares tear them down." Her confidence was as glittering as her diamonds, and just as fragile. But outside her ornate walls, the net drew tighter each day. Recordings piled high, testimonies grew sharper, allies multiplied, and strategies aligned. The Ashworth Empire, centuries old and wrapped in the illusion of untouchable prestige, had no idea that within its foundation, cracks had already begun to spread. And as Thomas looked across the table at Jasmine and Marcus, he knew the storm they were building would not simply bruise Victoria Ashworth's pride, It would shake her empire until the entire structure collapsed. The day of reckoning arrived with the kind of precision that no amount of wealth or influence could stop. Inside the grand Ashworth Academy boardroom, portraits of stern-faced ancestors stared down from gilded frames, as if silently approving the exclusivity their family had enforced for generations. Victoria Ashworth presided at the long oak table, her diamonds flashing under the chandelier, her voice smooth with false confidence as she addressed her trustees. "Our legacy," she declared, "is untouchable. Let others waste their breath with jealousy. We, as always, stand above." The applause of sycophants filled the room, only to be shattered by the sudden swing of heavy doors. A team of federal investigators strode inside, their badges gleaming. The room fell into stunned silence. Victoria rose sharply, her face paling. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, but her voice quivered. The lead agent's tone was calm, almost cold. "The meaning, Mrs. Ashworth, is justice. We have evidence of systemic discrimination and fraud within your institutions, and today that evidence will be heard." One by one, small speakers were placed across the table. A button was pressed, and the room filled with the damning sound of Victoria's own voice, captured without her knowledge. "We don't need their kind in our schools," she sneered on the recording. "Our legacy is not for them." Gasps echoed as more clips played, board members conspiring to raise tuition to push out unwanted applicants, staff laughing about altering test results, Victoria herself dismissing children with disabilities as burdens on our standards. Every word, every venomous remark laid bare for her peers to hear. Faces turned pale. Trustees exchanged horrified glances, and some covered their mouths in shame. Victoria's carefully constructed empire unraveled not with fire, but with the truth of her own cruelty echoing against the walls she had once claimed as untouchable. Then came the moment that silenced even the investigators. From the back of the room, Jasmine stepped forward. No longer the quiet nanny in plain clothes, she carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had walked into fire and returned stronger. She set her folder of documents on the table and met Victoria's wide, disbelieving eyes. "My name," she said steadily, "is Dr. Jasmine Carter, Harvard Ph.D., special education. You dismissed me as invisible. You humiliated me in public. But you made one fatal mistake. You underestimated me." A collective murmur swept through the room. Jasmine opened the folder and slid evidence across the table. Records, recordings, testimonies. Her every movement was deliberate. Her calm, a stark contrast to Victoria's crumbling composure. For the first time in her life, Victoria found no words to shield her, no money to hide behind. She had been unmasked by the very woman she once thought beneath her. The collapse of the Ashworth empire came swiftly. Within hours, federal agents seized documents, froze accounts, and shut down offices. By evening, the headlines blazed across every major outlet. Ashworth, legacy built on discrimination. Schools seized, assets frozen. Parents who had once been silenced by shame now spoke openly, their voices amplified by the undeniable proof. Trustees scrambled to distance themselves, and donors vanished like smoke. The jewel of Chicago society was revealed to be nothing more than a relic of arrogance and cruelty. And as cameras flashed outside the courthouse days later, Victoria Ashworth herself was led away in handcuffs, her head held high in defiance even as her empire crumbled beneath her feet. The woman who believed she stood above all was finally forced to stand equal before the law. 6 months later, a very different scene unfolded in the same city. Where Ashworth banners once hung, new signs now glowed: the Carter Harrison Education Network. The classrooms buzzed not with exclusion, but with possibility. Children of every race, background, and ability filled the halls, their laughter ringing, with the kind of hope that could not be bought or barred by wealth. At the center of this new movement stood Thomas and Jasmine, not as CEO and academic, but as partners in purpose. Thomas had repurposed his company's innovations to create technology that made learning accessible to all. Jasmine used her research to design curricula that celebrated differences as strengths. Together, they built something greater than either could have alone. And in those classrooms, Emma thrived, her blindness no longer seen as limitation, but as a symbol of resilience. She served proudly as the network's ambassador, speaking to students and parents alike, her words carrying the wisdom of a child who had seen more without sight than most did with eyes wide open. As for Victoria Ashworth, her fate was sealed in the stark walls of a courtroom. Convicted of fraud, discrimination, and abuse of power, her name that once commanded fear now evoked only contempt. Her empire dismantled, her fortune stripped, her legacy rewritten in history books as a warning. She had sought to build monuments to her family's superiority, but in the end she became the cautionary tale of arrogance brought low. Where her schools once stood, the Carter-Harrison network thrived, her downfall feeding the soil of progress she had tried so hard to choke. In the final chapter of this story, it was Emma who spoke the truest words. Standing before a crowd of students at the network's opening ceremony, her small voice carried with unshakable clarity. "The best revenge," she said, "is to build something better." Her words were met with thunderous applause, not just because they rang with innocence, but because they carried the weight of undeniable truth. The crowd rose to its feet, parents wiping tears, children smiling with hope. And so the story closed, not with bitterness, but with triumph. Victoria had tried to wield power to preserve prejudice, but Jasmine had wielded intelligence to rewrite history. Thomas lent his innovation, Marcus his law, and Emma her wisdom. Together, they proved that true excellence knows no color, no class, no limits. The empire of exclusion crumbled, but from its ashes something brighter rose, a legacy, not of arrogance, but of inclusion. And that legacy would endure far longer than diamonds, wealth, or gilded names ever could.